Hey there, designers. Welcome to Huddle. Today we have a special guest joining us, Eric Hahn, full stack developer at Inkblot. He's going to be helping us dive deep into the designer dev relationship, something that is a pinnacle to the UX design industry and something that we will be building for the rest of our career journeys. So excited for you to jump into this with us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Welcome back, designers, and welcome to Huddle. For those new to the show, we are Huddle, where we dive deep into the world of UX design and help you take your skills to the next level. Like I said before the intro, we have Eric here, a full stack developer. Eric, can you introduce yourself for the audience and tell us a little bit about your story?
Sure, absolutely. So I'm a intermediate developer at Inkblot Therapy. I've been doing this for about 3 years. I started off with a boot camp as well. So I know that with all of your stories, you guys all started at the exact same design boot camp, yeah?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah. So I sort of mirror that experience with you guys.
What boot camp was that, if you don't mind me asking?
It was Concordia Boot Camps in Montreal.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah. Previously known as Decode.
Oh, cool. And what was your experience with that?
It was really hard. I think I listened to an episode earlier about you guys going to boot camp.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering what the difference between a developer and designer boot camp would be like. Really, the only difference that I saw was subject matter.
Mm-hmm.
Really, that was it. Like the commiseration on Slack,
Yeah.
Staying up super late into the night, everybody coming to school the next day with like bewildered looks on our faces. Like we like it lasted maybe 3 months, and it felt like we aged like 4 years. Yeah.
Sure.
The trauma bonding was universal.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, that was my start there. If I remember correctly, BrainStation has a pretty good career services as well. Yeah. So it was the same thing with us. We had about 3 months of development training and then 6 months of career services. So from there, I got a hourly consultancy job as a junior developer at like a very, very small startup.
Mm.
It was the CEO, the CTO, and then me. So I was employee number 1. And and they hired me on for 20 hours a week, give or take. I worked for 20 hours a week for maybe 3 or 4 days. And then they were like, please just work 40 if you can.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's how it started. And then at a certain point, they're like, okay, stop billing us. We're just going to hire you. And then I became like a full employee, and I worked there for almost about maybe a year and a half. And then I moved on to freelancing for a bit. That was kind of interesting. It takes a lot of, how do I say it? Like you really have to put yourself out there. You really have to put yourself like on top of your business. And maybe that wasn't the best choice for me.
Mm.
And then I started looking for work again, and I ended up at Inkblot Therapy.
What was it like getting your start at a startup, especially as employee number 1?
Yeah.
When it was your first real experience in the industry after boot camp? What was that like?
I feel like in with startups especially, there's like a lot of like immediacy
Oh yeah.
involved, right? My company at the time, they were trying to get investment. That's the only way that their company would continue.
Mm-hmm.
So they started, they're like, we have these goals that we need to hit. We're trying to get this MVP out the door. We have this presentation coming up. So we're really trying to get all this stuff out, right? What that meant was on my very first day at this job, they asked me to build a whole full screen function to their video calling application. And I was just lost. I was absolutely lost. And during my first maybe 2 or 3 months working as a developer, I allotted time to just lay on my bed and like look at the ceiling and ask myself like, what is going on? Calm myself down. How do I do this? Calm myself down a little bit more and then go like, okay, let's figure this out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's figure this out. If there isn't a more tech savvy phrase, because I think that is really like the motto of everyone in this industry. There's not a whole lot of time to not figure it out.
Absolutely.
Would you say that is something that has kind of propelled you through the rest of your career as well, that kind of figure it out mentality?
Yeah, definitely. I think no matter what problem I run into at work, there's no questions that haven't been asked, right? So I'm not sure what the resources are for designers, but for developers, it's like you hop on Stack Overflow, you start Googling things like, hey, how do I do this? You just copy and paste bugs, like whatever like technologies you're using. And then at some point you'll find this sort of answer and you'll try it. It won't work. You give it another go. You try and like, like hone your Googling a little bit more. Like you start adding certain keywords in, you find your thing, you finally get it done. It's a big relief. And then you keep doing that over and over again until you run into your next roadblock. That being said, at my company now, there's a lot more developers. If I run into something, I can just ask somebody else if they've run into something similar. Yeah. And that's also very helpful.
Yeah, it's like working with a team is quite different than working on your own. So I'm wondering, do you have any experience working with designers?
I have a lot of experience working with this.
Please share with us, spill the tea.
Okay. Let's see. Where can I start? Maybe I'll start with like the relationship between developers and designers, right? Usually in like a team layout, there's more developers than there are designers, right? You can think of it kind of as like the architect and like the construction workers. Maybe that relationship is the best. The designer has like a much larger context when it comes to like building an application, right? They have like the business context, they have the like the flow of the application. So like what's gonna come from one thing to another thing. Yeah, exactly. And what are all the different states? The developers, they are specifically working on that page that they're working on in the application. The singular components in that application, so like the context is totally different, right? So developers can find a lot of things that designers aren't looking for, and designers can like catch things that developers aren't thinking about, right? There's this like relationship where hopefully they end up catching everything. There's no such thing as catching everything, but trying to catch like as much as they possibly can. Yeah. And like I feel like a good developer designer relationship will like mitigate as much of that as possible.
I see.
Yeah.
Do you have any tips from the perspective of a developer for designers? Like how, as a developer, you would expect designers to collaborate with you in order to achieve a good working environment and a good working balance between developers and designers?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of developers, they're like, especially front-end developers. So for people that don't know, front-end developers are the developers that build things that you touch and interact with and you can visually see. So you see a header, you click the header, the drop-down menu comes down, you press the button, it links you. So that's front-end. So a lot of front-end developers have to be very visually strong, so that they can like, how to explain this? Yeah, they have to be visually strong to like be able to look at a design, be like, okay, I can see the padding, I can see the margins, I can see the color. When they're developing it, they should be able to tell, oh, this is wrong, oh, this isn't correct, I need to fix this. Yeah, so developers, they are visual people. Designers are much more so, and then their focus is a lot more on the visual aspect. To kind of like catch all the holes that the developer might be leaving, I think it's important for a designer to be like fully involved in the development process if they have time. There's some cases where if a company only has one designer and the company is quite small, then the designer is just jumping project.
Mm-hmm.
In my team right now, we're working on a project that requires a lot of front end work.
Mm-hmm.
We're pushing code a lot, and we really want to make sure that like nothing falls through the holes,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
So we have a design refinement. I'm not sure if the refinement there's like a presentation of the design. We've had multiple of those, and then when we started making the actual pages, we would bring the pages that we're making, and then we'll do visual QA. We'll bring that to the designer, and we're like, okay, what do you think about this? But like,
Mhm.
is this okay? We couldn't make this work to the design.
Mhm.
Can we change the design? Do you want us to try harder to like make this work? Like a time management thing. Yeah. So
So it's all about communication between like different part of the project.
absolutely, yeah. And
Cool, cool.
I feel like in our teams we spend so much time
Mhm.
doing meetings and like either formal or informal to get that communication across.
So that sounds like what I've heard from a lot of developers, but I have questions about how early you get involved with the designers. I heard a conversation the other day where they were talking about the defeating experience of presenting a design to your developers and then them just saying like, that's not possible. And I think that would save everyone a lot of time by communicating early. But then we were also discussing informally before you got here, it could be kind of just something that might be a bit of a waste of time in some cases where you're involved almost too early and where you might find that annoying. So when you're working on your teams, and I'm sure every company and team is a little bit different, but when you're developing that relationship with your designers, like how early would you like to be involved in that conversation?
Right. So I have experience in two separate ways regarding that. One is in a corporate setting, and one is in a freelance setting. In the freelance setting, we were making like much more of like a community-based, sort of like a public art application for like folks to be using. And so I would be involved in the design process immediately. Me being the only developer, what can be done in the front end depends on my capacity, right? So involving me earlier in that sort of aspect, it makes things like it saves a lot of time, right?
Mhm.
You don't mock up so deeply into the design flow where when I say that something's not possible, you have to scrap a bunch of work. In the corporate setting, nothing is really so complicated. The complication comes from like the complexity of the application, like its breadth.
Mm-hmm.
It's not so much the depth. Yeah, at least that's what I found so far.
So it sounds like it would always be a good idea to get your developer involved with the technological feasibility questions as soon as possible. But are there any other things that you enjoy being a part of the process too? Like what about ideating or understanding the context of the research or understanding the business needs? Is that ever something that the developer would want to be privy to as well? Or is that something that you're just like, I don't need to be a part of this. You can keep me out of that meeting invite.
Yeah. Okay. I am a creative person, so on the side I do creative work. I think that comes with the assumption that I want to be involved with like the creation or the visual aspect or the ideation of projects at my workplace.
Mm-hmm.
It really can't be further from that. As a developer, I kind of feel like a code carpenter, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's so much that goes into like the actual building aspect of an application that it's really hard to context switch
Yeah.
between, okay, right now I need to be creative. Right now I need to like understand like creative communication. Right now I need to spend a bunch of time in meetings learning about the context behind like the application. I'm just not a stakeholder in that way. And I feel like if I was a stakeholder, somebody very involved with the project's ideation, I would not have a lot of time to be a developer.
Mm.
Yeah. And back to the context switching in like a different part of my job. Every time you have a meeting in between like a coding session, you know, it really pulls you out of it. Right?
Yeah.
And you
It
really,
takes away from your focus time.
exactly. And you really want to get into that flow state. You really want to just be, you know, like writing code, fixing bugs, like push, right?
I think that's actually an interesting point because I know that in a lot of design literature, there's a suggestion from designers to get your developers and your other stakeholders involved in the process early on so that you get buy-in from them and that they understand the why. But you're saying that it actually can lead to a lot of context switching for people on the team and could inevitably slow down the process of getting the product shipped out. So that's an interesting perspective and interesting to keep in mind that I think it sounds like you'd rather just be involved in the questions of can we do this, can't we do this,
And how?
and how.
Yeah. I think there's a fine balance.
Mhm.
But I think in my corporation that I work for right now, developers are the people who are involved in the least meetings.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then I think there's also a stereotype that developers tend to be like less social.
Mm.
And I think I think developers are like very like vibrant people. Like a lot of them are very vibrant people. It's just that our work requires a lot of like sitting down and just hitting the code.
Mhm.
We're in the
Mhm.
code mines every single day. We have like coal under our eyes. Right? Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of stereotypes, I know you're outside of being a developer, you're also a designer as well, which is quite different from the stereotypical developers. I know you personally. I know you're not the stereotypical part of design developers. Sorry. So, can you tell us more about like your design practice?
Okay, sure. So I am a designer, but not in the same way that these three are. I'm actually a fashion designer. That's my trade before this. Yeah. Let's see.
What makes you want to be a fashion designer at the first place?
I'm a huge fashion consumer, and I
Okay.
also happen to be a creative. So
Mhm.
I get like an urge to do this sort of thing. There's like a long story of me leading into this sort of thing, but at this point, it's like a compulsion and a want and a
Mhm.
need. I have to do my creative stuff. So I do my creative stuff.
Would you say like doing your creative stuff that somehow like help you in developing like writing code? I don't know if that makes sense at all, but like I'm just curious how you balance out these two like seemingly quite different types of life.
Yeah, absolutely. When I think about it, my practice in creating clothes is pattern drafting. So I'm a
Mhm.
pattern drafter. For folks that don't know what pattern drafting is, if you've ever seen somebody sew, they usually have to lay out a piece of paper on top of their fabric, and then they mark it, and then they cut out their markings. So they cut out these like garment pieces. The creation of those paper patterns requires a lot of logic and like mathematics.
It's arguably the most difficult part of the process.
I think I really don't like draping.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't like draping. I like drafting. So yeah, for everybody it's different, but I really love the pattern drafting portion of that. When I imagine clothes apart and flat on a piece of on the ground. When I look at a sleeve, I'm like, what does that look like if it was flat? How do people make it like that? So there's a lot of like logic involved. And one of the pathways to me leading into tech, or one of the ways that I kind of convinced myself that I would be a good choice to be a developer was, oh, my thing in fashion design is the most mathematic and logic based.
Mm-hmm.
So that means I must be good at computational logic for code, right? Yeah. So that was one of the ways that I.
That's like the connection between like your two parts of life.
Yeah. So I convinced myself with that, but when it comes to the actual carryover
Mhm.
between the two, maybe the only thing that carries over is like my capacity to work. So like I can when I make clothes, I sit down, put my head down, and I work. Same thing when I code, I sit down, I put my head down, and I work. And maybe that's just the like either it's foolhardiness or toughness, and whether it's one or the other depends on the day.
For sure, for sure.
Or just the ADHD hyperfocus kicking in.
Yeah. I have tricks to get it to like kick on.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then when I'm there, it's just like, oh, everything's out the window.
Yeah. Goodbye food, goodbye getting up from your chair.
Yeah, exactly. Like the perfect amount of coffee, just the right song, going to work out in the morning, something like that. It'll just I hit the ground running. I just hit the code. I'm like, oh, I know exactly what I need to do. Full 8 hours of sleep. That's a big one. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so interesting that despite like people are having so many stereotypes about us working in tech, like thinking about like glasses and play shirts, sitting in the chair, typing code every day. But actually this industry, this community is quite diverse and quite vibrant. And I know that similar to Eric's experience, a lot of us as designers in this industry will also come from like various backgrounds, have a different life outside of, designing things in Figma or typing code. And I guess that's one thing I like about this industry is how different everyone is and how inclusive it can be.
Mm-hmm.
And speaking of which, do you have any suggestions for people out there who are trying to break into this industry, whether as developer or as designer? Do you have any suggestions for them?
To clarify, for designers, is it like designer developers, like both at once?
For anyone who's at junior level, because I know the job market right now is not that promising. It's not that,
Yeah, it's looking a little bleak out there.
Mm-hmm. It feels like everyone's trying to do side hustles. And do you have any tips on that, like how to balance out life, how to balance out your day work and side hustle?
Okay. Let's go with learning to develop first, and then we'll move on to the side hustle. Learning how to develop. Let's see. If you are somebody who's interested in getting into code, the first thing that I would say is there's a lot of paid programs out there, like online programs that offer like, oh, you're going to learn how to, write, I don't know, C# in like 4 weeks. Just follow this program, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of stuff out there that wants you to pay money. You don't need to do that.
Yeah.
Start at Code Academy. Have you guys heard of Code Academy?
Yeah.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. So Code Academy has pretty much everything to start at the beginning. You touch maybe like JavaScript, or you maybe touch Python. You see how you like it, and then you decide from there, what kind of development am I interested in doing, right? You learn how to do like front-end development. I think that's a great start for a lot of people who have like a creative background or are more visual people. People who are like very into like logic and data, maybe look into back-end development. And then you do enough back-end, you do enough front-end, you understand maybe not the syntax, but you start to understand like code better. And you can start becoming something like a full stack developer if you want to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Which is what you are.
Yes.
Could you actually explain to us what languages you speak and kind of demystify them a little bit, maybe in the simplest terms for us?
Speak with my hands.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I started with JavaScript. I'm a JavaScript developer. So my, let's see, in code, how well do you guys understand like frameworks and libraries?
Assume that we know nothing.
Okay, great. So JavaScript is a language. When I code in JavaScript, I use a framework called React. Have you guys heard of React?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah. So frameworks are these sorts of technologies on top of a language to add a certain functionality to it. In this case, React is this componentization So I can create like a piece of code and then I can reuse it in different places and I can create like a file structure very similar to HTML. Yeah. And then that's how we build our applications. And that was developed by Facebook. Right now we're using TypeScript, which is essentially just like a more tight, less error-prone version of JavaScript. And then we also use that with React. And that's what is that? That was developed by Microsoft. Then in the backend, I use JavaScript as well. And then we use a framework called Node. And that's to build REST APIs, which are these special sorts of backends that are very common right now. And then at work, we use Ruby on Rails, which is an older technology for backends. That's kind of interesting. And I'm having fun learning about it. Yeah, that's just a bunch of words.
Yes,
Yeah,
I was
yeah.
gonna say that for designers. But like also we get to know like what are the names to look into like after the episode to know a little bit more about coding.
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of like people ask a lot of questions like, where do I start? Where do I start? I don't even have an answer for you. Maybe try JavaScript, see how that goes. Finish some courses. You'll find out what you like. If you want to be a developer, I feel like do some soul searching, figure out what kind of developer you want to be. If the answer is just like, I want to be a paid developer, then maybe look at the companies you want to work for and then figure out what their stack is and then learn their stack.
Would you say like for designers who want to know more coding knowledge, look into maybe front end, HTML and CSS?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think like the basics of learning like HTML, CSS, that's a big thing. I feel like designers can learn a lot on the job because they interact with developers. And there's a lot of shared knowledge as well, right? There's like the different states of the application. Like, oh, this should be a modal. This should be a loading state. This should be like a sidebar. This is how it should pull out, right? Developers and designers share that sort of language. That being said, since the two jobs are so different, especially in like the greater context,
Yeah.
I would dissuade anybody from trying to become like a full-on like unicorn.
Yeah.
So like full developer, full designer. It's just way too much to try and handle or deal with unless you're like a one-person agency and you have like a really tight pipeline where you're like, okay, like this is how I do this. This is how I do that. Bam, bam, bam.
Yeah, and there's so much change happening in both industries. It would be almost impossible to try to keep up with the changes in both of them at once.
Exactly. Yeah. Like you got to imagine you're working like 40 hours a week, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less. You have to stay on top of like the new technologies, or there's like this pressure to stay on top of the new technologies that are coming through. And then like if you had to do that at the same time as a designer, it's just too much, way too much.
I guess in terms of that, without going all the way to full-on unicorn, what type of knowledge would help a designer entering that designer-developer relationship? Is it good to go to your developer early on and figure out like what languages do you speak and what capabilities, and then figure out for yourself like what capabilities are there within that, and like is that enough, or is there some way that we could quantify how we could show up to that relationship with some kind of knowledge on our end as well?
Right. I think it's hard to quantify that. And for, every designer and for every developer, it's different. But I do believe that designers lead a lot of conversations when it comes to the general creation of like an application. So that kind of comes first before like the granular part of like the development. So I think as a designer, you should reach out to your devs, be like, hey, what's going on? Do you need help with anything? Can I clarify anything with you? My door is always open.
Yeah.
Like, just shoot me a message. We can like hop into a huddle, like anything like that. Keeping that communication open, because sometimes developers aren't the best at communication, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So reach out, figure it out exactly what the other person needs, and don't be afraid to make mistakes.
Yeah, that's so important. I guess from an early stage, what would it look like to create that good relationship in your mind? Like, what would it just be? Sending a quick hello when you join the team to your developer, and maybe setting up a quick chat with them just to connect and figure out who they are, like even outside of work, just so that you develop that working relationship with them. Like, what has been really effective in your world?
So right now at my company, when a new person joins the team, the management actually sets up one-on-ones with every single member of the team.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, it's really great, and it works really well to like kind of break the ice between people. That being said, I have a really great relationship with my designer that I'm working with right now, Juliet Fajardo, at Inkblot Therapy. And we mostly just get along because we get along, right? Like, and like our personal relationship allows us to, really just like when we need to, like, we hit the weeds, we're like, okay, what's going on? Let's figure this out. Why is this progress bar like 20 pixels? It should be 4. And I'm like, okay, hold on. And then like I'm like diving in there. We're just chatting. Yeah. It's cool. It's casual. But we get stuff done, right?
Yeah. One thing I've always heard from mentors in the industry is that just day one, become best friends with your developer, because they're going to be the one that you are always like going to their desk and figuring things out with, and you guys are just going to go and back and forth a lot. And so just, if you can, set up your desk right next to theirs and get to becoming friends.
Yeah. Pushing pixels, centering divs. It's what we do.
Cool. I guess we'll wrap up from here, and thank you so much for being on this episode with us. Thank you for huddling with us.
Do you have anything to plug before we go? Any quick shout outs you want to make?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can catch me on my LinkedIn. I believe that's you can just type in Eric Hahn, or my URL. I think it's Eric Hahn 6. But yeah, look for me there. Connect with me. Shoot me a message if you have any questions. Also on my Instagram, we're doing a launch for my brand soon. We're sort of like relaunching it. You can find that at Pillar Brand. So just one word, PILLAR brand. Yeah. And thanks so much for having me on the podcast.
Thank you, Eric. We'll make sure to link in the show notes all of those links that Eric just shared with us. So if you're looking for those, check out the show notes. Thank you for joining us today. Really great conversation that we had here, looking into the designer-dev relationship, and some really good insights that we can now all take back to industry and create building those relationships and work on making the best product possible. So thank you again, and this has been The Huddle.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Huddle. We appreciate your support and hope you enjoyed this episode. If you'd like to hear more, don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you want to watch along, make sure to subscribe to our YouTube and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. If you're feeling generous, please leave us a review and rating on your favorite platform. Your feedback helps us improve our content and reach more people. Until next time, keep learning, growing, and exploring. Today's show was produced by Meg, Mel, and Cam, with help from Meg, Mel, and Cam. Editing from Cam, music from Half Cool. I'm Meg. Thanks for joining The Huddle.